We moved to Willow Ridge for the quiet, the kind of quiet you earn, not inherit. My wife Claire and I had spent the last decade chasing chaos. She was a detective in the city, the type who never blinked in the face of crime scenes or courtrooms. I ran logistics for emergency services, often working through disasters while others fled them. So when my father passed and left us his ranch on the outskirts of town complete with a red metal barn, a horse named Scout, and 5 acres of wild serenity, we didn't hesitate. Claire, newly appointed as Willow Ridge's incoming police chief, had taken a short leave before assuming her role. We kept that detail quiet, letting the dust settle before the news hit the town's rumor mill. She wanted to be just another neighbor, a woman in jeans and boots, not a badge and uniform. But anonymity has a short lifespan in small towns, especially when there's an HOA sniffing for control. Enter Karen Delaney. If ever there was a woman who believed her clipboard was a weapon, it was her. With a perfectly trimmed bob and an expression that defaulted to disapproval, Karen was the self-appointed queen of Willow Ridge's HOA. Her house sat on the crest of Maple Hill, where she could look down literally and figuratively on everyone else. The first interaction came innocently enough. Claire was sweeping the barn aisle when Karen appeared. As if summoned by the scent of fresh hay, she stood just beyond the fence, nose wrinkled like she'd smelled manure despite being dressed in heels and pearls like she was headed to brunch. Not the rural edge of town. "Excuse me," she called. "Are you aware that livestock structures must be 60 feet from any neighboring property?" Claire turned, leaning casually on her broom. "I'm not running livestock, just brushing out the barn." Karen squinted. "I've seen horses here. They're ours." "One horse. Technically, he's part of the family." Karen smiled tightly. "Well, whether it's 1 or 10, it's a violation. This is a residential neighborhood, and the HOA has very clear guidelines." Claire stepped forward and opened the gate slowly. "Whip, not part of the HOA." Karen's nostrils flared. "Technically, your land borders the jurisdiction, which means your activities affect the aesthetic of our community. I've notified code enforcement." Claire crossed her arms, cool and unbothered. "We're not breaking any code, and if you step foot on this property again without permission, I'll consider it trespassing." Karen's face flushed, but she said nothing more. She spun on her heel and stormed off, her heels clicking against the gravel like a ticking clock. From that moment, the tone was set. The next week, we found a laminated warning zip-tied to our fence. Non-compliance may result in legal consequences. HOA Regulation 14.3, Visual Disruption and Property Harmony. It would have been laughable if not for how obsessively she escalated. Photos began appearing in our mailbox: Claire walking the horse, Claire carrying tools, Claire standing in the barn doorway. Always taken from a distance, always anonymous, though we knew exactly who sent them. Then came the letters, filled with pompous language about property values, unauthorized barn usage, and the supposed right of oversight granted to HOA officials. We ignored them until one morning when Claire found our front gate unlatched and Scout visibly shaken. That was the moment Claire's demeanor shifted. The calm, polite woman who tried to offer Karen the benefit of the doubt was gone. In her place stood the one I remembered from years of crime scenes, sharp-eyed, composed, and ready for battle. "She thinks this is a game," Claire muttered as she examined the disturbed ground near the gate. "But I've played games with worse people than her." I didn't need to ask what she meant. Claire had once chased a cartel suspect across 3 state lines without blinking. Karen didn't scare her, but she irritated her, and that made her dangerous. That evening, Claire finally took out her badge, the one she hadn't shown anyone in town yet, and placed it on the kitchen counter beside her coffee. She stared at it, quiet. "She's picking the wrong fight," she said. I nodded. "And she has no idea who she's poking." Claire smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Then let's make sure when it hits, it really hits." Outside, the wind rustled the pine trees lining the fence. Inside, war had already begun. The morning it all exploded started deceptively calm. Claire was in the barn brushing down Scout, humming softly to herself like she always did when she needed to think. The golden light filtered through the slats in the roof, illuminating dust like floating diamonds. I was halfway through frying eggs when I heard it, a siren. Not fast, not screaming, just a slow, creeping wail. Then came the crunch of tires on gravel. I stepped outside and saw the patrol cruiser creeping up our drive, followed closely by another. The sight made my stomach knot, not from guilt, but from recognition. These weren't regular drive-bys, this was a response call. I dropped the spatula and jogged out to meet them. By the time I rounded the corner, 2 young officers were standing awkwardly in front of the barn. One of them had a notepad out, looking entirely unsure what to do with it. The other looked fresh out of the academy. Claire stood in the doorway, arms folded, lips pursed, and behind them, smug as a cat in cream, stood Karen. She had her arms crossed, her phone still raised like it was some kind of holy relic. "There she is," Karen said, pointing at Claire, like a prosecutor at trial. "That's the woman I told you about. She's harboring livestock, operating an unlicensed facility, possibly even squatting." "Squatting," Claire repeated, tilting her head. Karen didn't flinch. "You've got no proper documentation." no visible permits, and this entire structure is in violation of HOA code. That horse is dangerous. I saw it paw the ground aggressively. The younger officer scratched his temple. Ma'am, we are here responding to a report of unauthorized livestock in a residential area. This isn't a residential area, Claire said calmly. It's zoned mixed-use agricultural. You can confirm that with the county, and this property is legally minded and taxed paid. I stepped up beside her, arms folded. And just for the record, she's not part of your HOA, Karen scoffed. The presence of this property directly affects our community. Visual blight is actionable under community code. You've said enough. Claire cut in, eyes now trained on the officers. Let's stop pretending. Do either of you have a warrant? No, ma'am, the older one replied. Then, unless you have probable cause, I'd recommend you back off and take your informant with you, because if you don't, I'll be forced to inform your supervisor that 2 officers just responded to a frivolous 911 call, one involving false accusations and a misuse of department resources. Karen laughed, dry and nervous. She's bluffing. She doesn't know the first thing about protocol. Claire stepped forward slowly, hand slipping into her vest pocket. She produced a leather badge case, flipped it open with surgical precision. The silence that followed was absolute. Chief Claire Morgan, she said, voice steady, sworn in last week. I haven't made the formal public announcement yet, but rest assured it's official. And what I'm seeing right now, gentlemen, is a civilian weaponizing law enforcement for personal harassment. The rookie's mouth opened, then shut. Karen turned, a shade paler, eyes flicking between Claire's badge and the officer's. I didn't know, she stammered. That much is obvious, Claire said coolly. And if you ever set foot on my property again without cause, I will press charges for trespass and file a formal complaint with the HOA governing board. This isn't your kingdom, Karen. The officers offered stammered apologies and retreated toward their cruisers. Karen, on the other hand, stood frozen, her pride unraveling by the second. You can't threaten me, she sputtered. To have connections, I know the mayor. I can file a complaint. Claire took one slow step toward her. Do it, please. I'll file one of my own. Let's compare notes. Karen turned and fled like a whipped dog, nearly tripping over the gravel. In her rush to escape, I let out a long breath. Claire didn't say a word. She simply turned, walked back into the barn, and picked up Scout's brush like nothing had happened. But I knew her well enough to recognize the storm building behind her calm. The real fight wasn't over. It had just begun. Karen didn't just retreat, she regrouped. In the weeks that followed, she mounted a quiet but relentless campaign. Her first move was subtle, a mass email to HOA residents titled, Preserving Community Standards Against Outside Influence. It was drenched in coded language phrases like outsider elements, questionable authority, and protecting neighborhood traditions. She never named Claire directly, but the implications dripped like venom through the text. Then came the letters. Official-looking envelopes began arriving at our mailbox and signed notices citing obscure zoning ordinances, noise violations, and alleged improper land use. One claimed our barn lights were a nuisance beacon. Another accused Claire of housing a potentially dangerous animal without license, referencing Scout. Claire read each one carefully, lips pressed into a line. She didn't get angry, she got precise. We're dealing with bureaucratic harassment, she told me one night, laying out the stack of notices like pieces on a chessboard. Karen's using loopholes. She's working behind closed doors. Sure enough, we discovered Karen had a long-standing friendship with a zoning officer at City Hall, Roger Pritchard, a man with just enough authority and just enough bitterness to be dangerous in the wrong hands. Suddenly, surprise inspections began happening. One showed up under the pretense of soil runoff control. Another claimed to be assessing our environmental impact. They never found anything actionable, but the message was clear. We were under siege. And still, Claire didn't flinch. Instead, she began documenting everything. She installed motion-activated cameras along the fence line. She saved every notice, printed every email, and tracked every suspicious vehicle that lingered too long outside our gate. Then came the HOA meeting. It was an emergency session, called by Karen, billed as a community leadership crisis discussion. Claire wasn't invited, but we had an ally on the board, Marla Bennett, a quiet woman who'd always waved politely and walked her beagle past our gate every morning. That night, Marla recorded everything, Karen's voice clear, shrill, unrepentant, through our living room speakers as we played it back. She's a threat, Karen declared to the HOA members. She's bringing in an authoritarian mindset. What happens when she starts telling us how to live on our own streets? We have to take action now, before she roots herself in this town. Then came the part that changed everything. She's not even from here, Karen sneered. And we all know her kind doesn't understand our values. Claire didn't speak at first. She just stared at the screen, eyes unmoving, jaw set. I could see it in her. Something sharp had been triggered. Not just offense, not just anger. Resolved. The next morning, Claire made a call to the mayor's office. Within hours, she was sitting across from Mayor Rhodes, flanked by the town attorney and a representative from the Civil Rights Commission. The Evidence spoke for itself: discrimination, harassment, weaponized bureaucracy, and a coordinated attempt to undermine a public official's authority. By the end of that week, Roger Pritchard was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. A city order was drafted to freeze HOA enforcement powers until a full legal review could be conducted, and a formal inquiry was launched into Willow Ridge's HOA governance. But Claire wasn't done. She proposed a new municipal ordinance that any HOA operating within city limits must publicly disclose all complaints, maintain recordings of board meetings, and relinquish enforcement authority over any property outside official membership, especially those zoned agricultural. Surprise! The council passed it unanimously. Karen had made too many enemies, pushed too many buttons, and now she was bleeding support. That night, as we sat on the porch watching the dusk settle over the fields, Claire finally allowed herself to breathe. She thought she could bury me in red tape, she said softly. She forgot I know how to set fire to the whole system if I need to. I reached for her hand. You didn't burn it, you rewrote it. She smiled, the kind that came from victory earned the hard way. But we both knew Karen wasn't one to fade quietly into the background. And sure enough, 2 days later, a letter arrived, not official, not legal, just a handwritten note, shoved into our mailbox, reading, "This isn't over." Claire held it between her fingers, staring at the jagged handwriting. "No," she whispered, "it's just about to get interesting." Claire kept the letter on her desk, right next to her badge, a silent reminder of unfinished business. Karen's threat wasn't just bitter handwriting. It was a promise, and Claire knew better than to ignore a promise from a cornered woman with something to prove. Sure enough, 1 week later, Karen made her final, desperate play. It started with an anonymous call to CPS Child Protective Services claiming our barn was being used to house unaccompanied minors and that there were hazardous materials stored dangerously close to living quarters. We didn't have children. We didn't store chemicals. It was complete fiction, but protocol meant someone had to follow up. A social worker arrived, red-faced and apologetic, standing on our front porch with a clipboard in clear discomfort. She'd received the call and had no choice but to verify the report. Claire cooperated fully, walked her through the barn, opened every cabinet, explained everything with calm authority. The inspection lasted 15 minutes and resulted in nothing but embarrassed apologies. "I get this isn't you," Claire said as she signed the final form, "but I need the official call log. There's a pattern here." The social worker hesitated. "Normally that's confidential, but..." The report was clearly malicious. "I'll escalate it internally." That was the crack Claire needed. She spent the next 48 hours compiling a report of her own, tracking the timeline of every complaint, letter, inspection, and encounter since our move. She voice recordings, security camera footage, the HOA meeting logs, and the CPS false report. She titled the document "Coordinated Harassment by Private Citizen in Abusive Municipal Systems." By Monday morning, she walked it straight into the district attorney's office, and by Friday, Karen Delaney received a subpoena. The charges were clear: filing a false report with a government agency, harassment of a public official, trespassing, and attempted interference with a municipal investigation. She was arrested in her driveway while pruning her rose bushes. The irony of it all: one of the officers was Claire's newest hire, a young Latina woman Karen had previously referred to as unqualified. The arrest went viral within the county. Footage from a neighbor's doorbell cam captured Karen sputtering as she was handcuffed. "You can't do this. I'm the HOA president," the officer calmly replied. "You're now a defendant." Public support rallied behind Claire. Local media praised her for exposing corruption at the community level. Even the mayor held a press conference reaffirming Claire's role and highlighting the importance of dismantling unchecked HOA overreach. But the true victory came a week later. During the final town hall meeting before winter, Claire took the podium. She didn't gloat. She didn't drag Karen's name through the mud. She simply told the truth. "This isn't about a barn," she said. "It's about boundaries, legal, moral, and personal. No organization, no matter how local, should be allowed to operate in shadows. I moved here for peace. I got war. And I stood my ground, not because I wanted to win, but because I refused to be erased." The crowd stood when she finished. A standing ovation, not just for her but for the idea that justice didn't wear a suit, didn't always speak softly, and sometimes wore boots and a dusty badge. Karen pled out weeks later: community service, a hefty fine, permanently banned from holding any HOA leadership in the state. Her name became a cautionary tale synonymous with ego gone unchecked. And as for us, spring came early that year. Claire expanded the barn. Scout got a new companion, a stubborn little mare named Peppa, who took an immediate dislike to Karen's distant barking dog. We built a garden near the fence line, grew vegetables and wildflowers, and every Saturday Claire hosted writing lessons for local kids, many from neighborhoods Karen had once tried to keep out of her perfect community. One morning, while mending a post, Claire looked over at me and said, "Funny thing about barns." "What's that?" I asked. "They're built to shelter, but they can stand up to storms, too." I smiled, stepping beside her. "So can the people who own them." Behind us, The sun lit the barn roof in gold, and for the first time in a long while, Willow Ridge felt like home.